Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning's webinar. I'm Andy Sherritt. I'm going to be introducing today's panelists in a moment. But yeah, just in terms of the usual housekeeping items, we do want your questions, please. So if you use the chat function, post the questions in there. We'll do our best to answer them at the end. Also, there will be a survey served to you at the end, so please do complete that. And as usual, we will be recording this session. So we'll be sending you a copy of that shortly after the webinar. So just to introduce today's panelists, most of you know me. I'm Andy Sherritt, Head of Business Development from ITHealth. Over to you, Lee.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, Lee Robinson, Regional Sales Manager for the public sector over here at Vectra. Thank you, supported by Dom.
Hi, Dom Ryder, nice to meet you all. I'm one of the senior security engineers here at Vectra and will be supporting the conversation today.
Thank you, guys. So most of you, I'm looking down, there's some familiar faces on the webinar today, so I probably don't need to do the sort of IT health overview, but essentially we do have a portfolio of solutions and services that are all geared towards helping you in the NHS around cybersecurity and assurance. We pick our vendor partners pretty carefully, so we don't take on new ones lightly. I think a lot of you, again, will be familiar with our relationship with Landsweeper and how we've built out the assurance dashboard with that. We also sort of specialise in some of our own solutions and services. Probably the most well-known of that is the Secure It two-factor authentication platform, which is also well deployed now. But as I said, today's session is really focused on the Vectra relationship, which is a new one for us. Yeah, we typically are quite selective in bringing on new vendors. We don't like to bring in products that are kind of treading on the toes of some of the other stuff we do, and equally it needs to be something that's going to solve a significant problem for our customers. We feel that Vectra very much does that, and hopefully the people on the call today will see that as we move through the presentation. So today's agenda, this is what you've signed up for, so I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time talking through the agenda and kind of why we've put it together, really. And Lee and Dom probably look for some of your input here as well, please. But the first point that we've tried to focus on is what are the typical challenges faced at the moment within the NHS. I think we probably all know that, to be frank. You know, it's the volume of threats dwarfing the level of resource that often you've got to deal with those. I think, Lee, is that a fair point to start?
Yeah, I'd say so, Andy. Thanks. I think, you know, certainly that alert fatigue, a typical example of all the different tools that are in place, is one of those points for sure. I think the other area for me is really around visibility, you know, gaining visibility across the full environment, you know, whether that's the cloud, data center, network, IoT or medical IoTs, you know, bringing all that together and seeing the alerts in one platform clearly would be a major benefit. But yeah, Dom, anything to add on that?
No, just to reiterate, really, yeah, exactly. The experience that we have when we're speaking with NHS organisations is exactly that visibility piece. You know, I don't have a complete understanding of everything that's in my network, and that's due to the unique approach that NHS trusts have, which is that, you know, they may have third-party trust devices, there may be IoT devices. More and more now are we seeing, you know, for example, only recently a conversation with an NHS trust who had an endoscopy cleaning machine that was connected to their network, and of course in those situations with, you know, medical IoT devices and a range of other systems, is getting visibility. If they can't have an agent on there, if they can't get visibility, if it's not in their estate, then how can they manage that threat? And yeah, just that other point as well, I think another key point as mentioned is that fatigue, is that when they do have visibility, some of the approaches that can be taken can really just give too many events for the security staff or for the service desk to be able to respond to them effectively. And so hopefully what we'll talk about later in this session is how Vectra is one of the technologies that can assist in those areas. So yeah, back to you, Andy.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time here because ultimately I think a lot of the presentation that we've got is going to address these, but just I guess from my 2p worth, as it were, obviously again, a lot of people on the webinar today have already got the assurance dashboard. So obviously IT Health, we talk a lot about visibility, knowing what's on your network, and certainly the assurance dashboard does a pretty good job of that. That's often then complemented, or complement's probably not the right word, but yeah, a lot of people already have the assurance dashboard for visibility and for knowing where some of the vulnerabilities are within that stack. Also, nearly everyone on the call will have some sort of antivirus type technology, potentially with some EDR built in to do that sort of threat protection piece on the endpoint. I think really where we've recognized the gap and why we've sort of looked to work with Vectra is that kind of bit in between, really. It's what about that traffic, and how do we understand where some of that movement around the network might be suspicious and might be leading to a breach. So I think that'll be something that will be interesting to focus on. Anything else here, Lee, before we move in that you wanted to talk about in terms of why Vectra was chosen, or are you going to cover that in your presentation?
Yeah, I think a lot of it will be covered. I think Dom's probably got a couple of other use cases we'll dive into in terms of the demo as well. But no, for me, I think that's fine. I think we've kind of set the scene there. So thanks, Andy.
No worries at all. Well, at that point, I'm going to hand over to you, Lee, anyway. So I'll be back in shortly. Cheers.
Thanks, Andy. I guess, generally what we talked around there is that alert fatigue, and I guess, the different tools that are available to different NHS organisations, obviously getting, in terms of the central tools, whether that's Microsoft ATP or the local tools, it's everyone's bringing alerts through, everyone's bringing, concerns to the table, and I guess it's a case of, how can we bring that together and have full visibility of what's going on the network.
Sorry, Lee, I need to pass you the control, don't I?
I was going to say, Andy, if you don't mind.
How many times did you click?
It was a bit like track and field there for a minute. No, it's all good.
You should have it now.
Thank you. Good stuff. Yeah, so most organisations, obviously, the perimeter security model, I guess, changed kind of overnight, as we know, with COVID, and that accelerated through, widening the network, I guess, in terms of coverage. I think what we see here, is that, in terms of the network itself, there are, many different areas that need to, we need to focus on, I guess. Look at the, hardening the data center, access to the data center, looking at the Office 365 or, different SaaS environments that we hold, and clearly, the expanding, IoT devices, medical IoT devices as well. It becomes even more challenging. On top of that, with the remote working as well, obviously that stretched the boundaries of the network, and it's kind of driving those challenges. How do we get on top of that? We look at the security operations in a whole, and I think that's even more challenging as we go forward. That's kind of forced everyone into that zero trust kind of network, and I guess it drives those three priorities for us. We talked around mobile endpoints, whether that's your traditional AV that you hold on a local environment, or the ATP that's managed centrally that you get visibility of. As I mentioned, hardening access to the cloud and the data center, so that we can pick up the security wrap around that. But I think what we see is absolutely key, and mirrors what Andy kind of said there, is in terms of being able to sort of detect and monitor everything in one solution will really help us going forward. I think what we've seen as well is with the introduction of the remote workers and that acceleration into the likes of Office 365, we're seeing that there's a big focus from an attacker point of view at the moment in terms of gaining access to those user credentials to kind of log in rather than break in. Clearly, that's a much more sort of simple way forward for the attackers. And we've seen from some research that we've done from 2020 last year, that 71% of organizations had kind of experienced that kind of account takeover. Now that rose from 2019 at around 40%. So you can see that there's a big increase and focus on that, whether that's Office 365 or Azure AD in terms of the credentials. Clearly a big focus for everyone in terms of attackers at the moment. Now I think for us, the challenge is always, like many suppliers, around that sort of central tenancy for the NHS. So if anyone's running the local tenancy, then certainly the security wrap around Office 365 is very relevant and available through the Vectra platform. And again, we'll come on to that in a moment in terms of the coverage and where we sit. I think generally, we're seeing these kind of breaches every single day, aren't we, unfortunately? And whether that's ransomware, different types of attacks. The attackers are getting cleverer. They're continuing to have advanced threats and develop their techniques to gain access, whether that's again through Office 365, as we've mentioned, or directly through the network. And I guess whether it's again focused on supply chains or like the SolarWinds example, source code attacks that are coming through, approved or whitelisted applications, I think it's even more challenging to stay on top of all of these types of threats and attacks.
Yeah, I'm just doing a webinar on it now, yeah.
So I think, for me, I think, in terms of, where that's led us to is a little bit of a false sense of security. We talked around some of the techniques that attackers are using, and obviously the different layers of the traditional security stack, if you like, whether that's the firewalls or web and email security, for example, or obviously the E3, E5 agreements that you have through Microsoft. I guess all of these kind of have one chance to kind of get it right in terms of access. And if any of these sort of defensive layers do fail, then the attackers have gained access to the network and they're able to move, whether that's moving laterally or push through that attacker behavior, attacker progression as we go forward. So there is a security gap, is what we see. Lots of customers that we're talking to and prospects as well identify with that, and it's how we can close that. And I think this is where likes of Vectra AI come in, where we can monitor the east-west traffic, the north-south traffic, to pick up the attacker behavior, focus on that and monitor that throughout the typical MITRE attack chain as we go forward. So if we're able to do that and monitor all of those attacks, we're able to bring visibility much earlier into the conversation and alert you before it affects the business applications or maybe even the patient care. So how do we close the security gap? I guess in terms of where we're at, we do have a unique approach to the industry. We have no signatures at all in our platform, so it's all based on AI and machine learning. We are completely agentless, so it sits on the network. No agents are needed to be deployed. We bring together, I guess those typical network packets and the logs from the different solutions, and we run them through kind of our one methodology through the two teams that we hold. So security research teams are working on that sort of supervised algorithms, looking at the user behavior. So that works straight out of the box. There's no need to change that as we go forward. That's part of our IP. And then in terms of the unsupervised by the data science team, that's where the algorithms learn what looks like normal behavior for yourselves, good and bad, and recognizes that within 2 weeks of the cycle. That kind of delivers that enriched data set, and then brings through all of the security alerts, tens of thousands of them, into different detections, whether that's based on the individual systems themselves or the accounts from Office 365. Normally I'll pause at this point. Dom, anything to add here in terms of a bit more context for the audience?
I think, well, yeah, just to add yeah, exactly a little bit more to that, to give, the typical questions we normally get at this point is, what do you mean supervised versus unsupervised algorithm? So give an example of that is a supervised machine learning algorithm is when we, the security research of the Vectra as an organization, has developed an algorithm to specifically focus on a particular attacker behavior. So that would be, for example, a command and control channel. Effectively being able to look inside effectively encrypted connections. Of course, we don't actually look inside encrypted connections, but what can we infer from that encrypted traffic to be able to see an active command and control channel versus other. And so that requires a mass amount of information. Typically, for any algorithm, it takes about a year for us to develop that algorithm, and in some cases, a single detection can have a number of algorithms that make up that detection logic. And so that is a supervised algorithm. It's something that we have curated, looking at many different types of packets, many different types of payload, in order to have a high fidelity, low noise detection and not triggering, in the event of a news ticketer or other kind of encrypted HTTP connections or HTTPS connections. Unsupervised, a good example for unsupervised machine learning algorithms is our PAA detection capability. So effectively what that is we're profiling every single account, service and system on your network in order to understand what is normal and what that observed privilege, not the granted privilege, that observed privilege is what we're monitoring for. So for example, you could have given a backup service, you could have given that maybe domain admin rights, so probably maybe some excessive rights given to that, but that backup service only ever communicates with the relevant service running on systems throughout the network. And so we learn that through an unsupervised machine learning approach, we understand what is normal for that particular account and how that interacts with those services. And then when we see an attacker, of course, leveraging those credentials in a non-standard way, that will create a detection to show, some form of unusual activity. And it's about the layering of these detection capabilities that is key. So I think that was just something I wanted to touch on. We'll cover some other points when we get into the demo as well. So back to you, Lee.
Great stuff. Thanks, Dom. Really useful to get some insights there, some examples. Thank you. So as a brief introduction to the platform itself, we have Cognito Detect for the network, obviously monitoring the network itself and looking at threats across that environment. We then have our focused area around Office 365 and Azure AD. We then offer a kind of, a brief look at, I guess, an element of SIEM technology here, where we can have a deeper dive into those kind of investigations. So if we see an incident, we can have a kind of 2-week look back and deep dive into the intelligence and metadata that we can see. Also provide sort of threat hunting investigations in there too. So it's really useful to get a feel for that. We'll try and cover that towards the end of the demo today, but we'll be quite tight for time. And then in terms of stream, obviously that's pushing the metadata into the likes of the SIEM technology that you may already subscribe to. I think as ever, it's important that the services kind of underpin the platform. So, within our technology, we're able to implement the solution within just a couple of days, sort of remote services. You're up and running and getting sort of maximum return on investment very, very quickly. That's also then extended further if you'd like to subscribe to, the proactive threat hunting investigations, an analyst working with your platform, looking at the platform and monitoring those kind of any incidents, alerts with you and your team. And then obviously if there is a breach for whatever reason, obviously an incident response team to be able to make sure that we're managing that effectively, remediating the threat, and obviously making sure that patient care continues to be provided. Now we can see here's a few value items here, whether that's efficiencies like we talked around from a SOC alert perspective. But first of all, I think, it's all around that visibility, bringing everything into one platform and having one single view, one pane of glass, if you like, to be able to see the threats that matter the most and be able to focus on that high fidelity alerting that really will make a difference to different organizations that we see. Many use cases already in the NHS see us as the kind of go-to platform, if you like, from alert perspective. And I think the other point, we talked around that, unplanned downtime. Reducing that unplanned downtime is absolutely key. Making sure services continue to run and are fully supported to ensure that patient care is unaffected by any of the threats and attacks that we see on an almost daily basis. I guess, you know, from here, you know, we know within the NHS we've got the Microsoft ATP, and obviously it's some areas of subscriptions to Splunk, etc. But I think, you know, multiple EDRs in place, and I guess, you know, from a Gartner perspective, you know, they came up with this SOC triad, which is all around, you know, I guess a baseline, if you like, from a security point of view, or being able to have a full intelligence by bringing that NDR, EDR, and SIEM together to make that kind of integrated approach. So we work on either a direct sort of native integration that we'll again touch on in the demo, or also look at the APIs themselves to be able to hook into to make it as flexible as possible. I think exchanging that intelligence between the systems is where our customers see the most benefit from. There's a couple of examples of you know, references, I guess, in terms of our estate and our relationships. If you look at you know, these, we won't walk through those, but you know, I guess generally, you know, we need to know what we didn't know, right? It's a great statement there, and I think, you know, that visibility piece and that go-to security tool really does resonate well for a lot of our customers there. So look, I guess, you know, in terms of that, hopefully it's sort of set the scene around NDR and our approach, in addition to that context from Dom's side. I think what we'll do now is move across to the demo with Dom, look through those use cases, and look forward to questions towards the end. Over to you, Dom.
Thanks very much, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. I'll make you the presenter, Dom. Just bear with me.
Thank you, Andy, not a problem. So while that's happening, hopefully I can do two things at once as well, click some buttons while speaking. But yeah, I think what was you know, really important that we covered there is hopefully we've touched on some of the challenges in which you have had or are having, and what I'd like to do is within this demo is talk through some of those things, and please do, if you have any questions about any of the things that we've just covered, please do drop those questions in. We'll cover them either during the session. Andy, if you think pertinent to do so, please don't hesitate to interrupt. Otherwise we'll pick them up at the end as well. But just going back to some of those challenges, you know, that we spoke about, and especially what we hear from our NHS customers is that alert fatigue is how can we present information, irrespective of are we an NDR or an EDR or a SIEM technology, how can we present this information in a way that is can be consumed by maybe potentially a service desk? Could we leverage existing resources within the business? As we know, resource constraint from a security specialist perspective, how can we do that? Or how can we decouple the risk of effectively you know, training up an individual to a point whereby they are so capable that they I'm afraid are given a tremendous opportunity elsewhere, and that kind of brain drain type problem space as well. So how can we look to kind of utilize a machine and human together to be able to potentially reduce some of the risk there as well? So we'll touch on these points within this demo now. So hopefully you can see my screen here, and we can see this initial dashboard screen. So when logging into the system, you are presented with this overview, and in this particular case, we're monitoring 3,000 IPs, so a small environment within our demo environment here, and we've got a very high number. We've got 9 critical hosts. Typically what we see within an NHS estate of, say, circa 15,000 IPs there or thereabouts, is we're talking about 1 or 2 systems per day that the organization needs to take an action on. So effectively that's typically a critical or a high. So within a week we're talking about a handful of systems that we're recommending that you need to investigate. And so therefore, because of that, and what we've seen some NHS trusts have done is they've leveraged the service desk by effectively, when we present a warning or an alert with regards to a critical or a high system, because there are very few of these, it effectively creates an automatic ticket on the service desk. And what the service desk say is that they like this opportunity to give their staff the ability to look into something different, and as long as they are not too frequent, it's something that they're very happy to do. So effectively leveraging your existing service desk into effectively a SOC or a kind of a level 1 or 2 SOC analyst position, and I'll showcase how we do that. But yeah, very busy environment as you would expect for our demo environment here. So we've got 9 critical hosts to look at. We can see that we have within this host severity summary, critical, high, medium, and low. We'll speak about that in a short moment. We also indicate here any key assets. We've not tagged any systems as a key asset, but what that means is it doesn't change the logic in any way. It's a visual representation that may allow you to look at, for example, you may see 2 systems. They both have equal weighting potentially from a severity perspective. And if one is indicated by a gold star is effectively a key asset, that will indicate to you that you may want to look at that system first. So that's the concept that we have with key assets. We also show worst offenders, be that from a host or an account perspective. We have attack campaigns, which we'll cover on if we have time within this session, and we also break down detections from a kill chain perspective and also by the detection type. But let me move into the host screen that we have for our platform. And here you can see we have this concept of threat versus certainty. So we're a real-time platform, real-time monitoring platform. And what that means is that in certain situations, we may receive detection for a specific system. It might have quite a high threat, but we're just starting to receive the information. So we're not certain of it yet within the first, say, few seconds. But as we start to see more events, as we see more information, then effectively that detection will move across this certainty plane. And so hence the reason why we have this threat certainty concept. But as you can see here, we're not talking about individual events. We're talking about events being correlated into a detection, and we're not even showcasing here individual detections. What we're showing here is actual hosts in question. So what we're showing here is giving you that automated prioritization of saying, these are the hosts that you need to investigate right now. And so if we was to select any one of these hosts, you can see it gives an overview of the detections that we're seeing within this system. So in this case, this Conrad system has a threat score of 76 and a certainty score of 88, and that's made up of these particular behaviors. And again, going back to what Lee mentioned earlier, is that there are no signatures within the platform. This is all detection logic based upon machine learning. And so therefore, you can say that we as a platform operate in a zero-day way as such, in the sense that no signature is needed, no specific TTP piece of information is needed for us to derive a detection. And so again, that's what gives some great benefit to organizations. So what I'd like to do now is focus on one of these particular hosts in question related to the recent SolarWinds attack. Now, what we know of the SolarWinds attack is that that was unique for 2 primary reasons. The first one is the compromise of supply chain and loading the payload into the software and therefore getting the payload onto an organization's network in that way. But if we were to say that payload was brought in via a phishing attack or any other means, then effectively, that is where the differences stop as such. But the second key point to talk about with the SolarWinds attack is related to the way in which they leveraged not just the network, but they also leveraged O365. And so that's the reason why I thought it was a good scenario to talk about initially to showcase the system. So what we can see here within the this particular system, this is our Orion system on the demo environment. We can see initially that there has been this hidden HTTPS tunnel, and as we know, the attacker effectively had two command and control channels. The first initial callback, and then when they selected a particular organization of interest, they then sent down a command for a more feature-rich payload and framework to be downloaded that then established the secondary command and control channel. And so here we're showing these command and control channels, and effectively we are looking from a supervised machine learning perspective very closely at HTTPS connections and being able to derive and distinguish the difference between a command and control channel versus standard or benign HTTPS information. So not only do we tell you about that there is a hidden HTTPS tunnel on this particular system and giving you the key information to understand what is happening, is we also give you further information to explain what are the MITRE TTPs ID related to this particular detection, what are the triggers, the possible root causes, the business impacts and the steps to verify. And so that's whereby as a service desk individual or maybe as a new individual to cybersecurity as such, you know, I can leverage this platform by reading through this information and being able to present that information back to the business rather than effectively simply having to go away and have an understanding of what is happening within this system here. Furthermore, we can see some suspicious LDAP queries, that reconnaissance, that lateral movement as they're coming across the network. I won't necessarily focus for time too much on these detections, but one of the things that I wanted to highlight on was this suspicious remote execution. So in this case, the attacker has effectively made connectivity to one of the systems in our network, and this is owned by Gwen. Gwen is an IT admin, and so that obviously gives me a level of concern. But what is quite concerning is this privileged anomaly detection, and in this case it's what we call an unusual trio. So it's unusual because of the host, account and service have not been seen previously. So in this particular case we can see here that the host, the Orion system, has never previously utilized the Gwen admin account, and we know that the Gwen admin account is actually a high privileged account. And what is also highly unusual is that this account, although it has the permissions to communicate to the terminal services service on the ADFS server, it has never done this before on this particular host, and actually it's never done it previously as well. So we're effectively saying, look, there's some we have some great suspicion here around this Gwen admin account being leveraged by the attacker to gain access. As we know, the attacker wanted to move as quickly as possible to the ADFS server so they can then cut themselves some keys and then able to carry out a range of activities within Office 365. So what I'm going to do now is select that particular account because I want to know more about what has this account been doing. And we can see here that particular detection that we was just seeing on that particular system, but we can also see all of the Office 365 and Azure AD detections as well. And the reason why I wanted to focus on this is that we're seeing more and more as NHS trusts are leveraging O365, and we're seeing attackers are also leveraging O365, either from, in this particular case, represents something that we've observed within the NHS is an attacker coming in onto the network through whatever means and then moving laterally into O365, or in some cases the other way. We've seen situations whereby an attacker has gained credentials, gained access to the O365, and then through effectively mail forwarding rules created a mechanism for a malicious payload to be downloaded onto that person's system, executed, and then allowing them to have command and control on that system, and then again move through the network laterally. But in this particular case, we know that the attacker was wanting to move towards the O365 environment as quickly as possible. And the reason for this is that they leveraged O365 to exfiltrate data. And so that's something that's very key, that only a solution like the Vectra solution is able to showcase this complete attack chain. Other technologies may potentially, say from an endpoint perspective, may be focusing on the typical way in which data is exfiltrated over a command and control channel. But in this particular way, we're also providing the visibility of O365. So selecting on any of these detections, so if I select this particular one, this Azure ID suspicious detection, we can see a range of information that gives an indication to the reasons why this was fired. And we can see here it's a rare IP and it's a concurrent session. We're also giving some further information to understand what are the normal device names for this account, the normal device OS and browser pairs that are typically used, and the countries that they would typically use as well. And what is interesting in the approach that we take is we're not firing an individual event here for you to investigate. What we're showcasing is saying, look, we have seen this suspicious sign-on, followed by some suspicious Azure AD operations. We can then see the redundant access being created, the transport rule, the e-discovery, and then a suspicious Power Automate flow creation. So it's about showing all of these detections within the context of an account to allow you to get a full understanding of the narrative of the attack, and also able to then carry out responsive actions. And in some case, you may want those to be automated as such. And so because we have this way to correlate events to detections and detections to either an account or a host context, you're then able to effectively carry out responsive actions on the no individual detection type or TTP. You're effectively saying, if this is a bad account or if this is a bad system, I want to do something about it. And so that's another unique approach in this way. And so just conscious of time, I want to give us some time to speak or for any questions, but also as well to maybe go through another scenario. Is here we can see this particular detection here, this unusual e-discovery search. If we open this up, we can see that the attacker has tried to mask what they're doing by giving it the name of do not touch. This is a compliance search, but in actual fact we can see that the query is related to source code or patent information, and we can see then that effectively a Power Automate flow has been effectively created related to Dropbox, which is the way in which they are exfiltrating data out of the organization. So I hope what I've been able to do is over the first few minutes here is give you a good overview of how the Vectra solution is able to give you this holistic and complete view of threats within your enterprise. It gives you this automated prioritization of what systems that you need to focus on right now, as well as also giving you the right information at the right time, be that for environments such as O365, and furthermore as well also related to any particular account on the system as well. So I'll pause at this point and ask, do we have any questions that you'd like me to answer, Andy?
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Andy here. Yeah, so a couple of questions has come in. No particular order. Thank you, Peter, for this one. One for you, Dom. How does Vectra operate within encrypted connections? Is it a case of decrypting the traffic or not?
Yeah, very, very key question there. Thank you. Yeah. So the Vectra platform doesn't decrypt connections, and the reason for that is, as when we're seeing more and more now, it's becoming more difficult to decrypt connections. And in actual fact, what you tend to find is the connections that you can decrypt are the benign connections that you already know about. And so therefore, the approach that we take is looking at how can we derive a signal from an encrypted connection. So, for example, with that HTTPS, hidden HTTPS command control channel that we spoke about, as an example of that, is what we are doing is effectively we have sensors on the network that are taking via, say, a span configuration, taking a copy of that data, and what we're doing is sampling that specific communication, hundreds or potentially even 1,000 times per second, but effectively very frequently, to be able to see the cadence of that connection. So the transmission versus the response, and even when a command and control framework, so Cobalt Strike an example, or the range of others as well, but even though within those frameworks you have the ability to add in delay or jitter, our algorithms are trained to focus on that key signal and pull that out and to present that data rather than presenting other hidden HTTPS sessions. So I hope that gives a little bit of a further explanation to that, of how we're able to see inside encrypted connections as such without actually having to decrypt the connection. So yeah, we don't decrypt the information because of the inability, more and more now, the inability to do so, but also as well from a compliance perspective as well, it can cause some complications when you are attempting to do so, and as I'm sure anybody has experienced, when you try to do this, it actually is a significant burden for the IT and IT security team to manage this kind of man-in-the-middle based framework that is being established across the network. So I hope that answers that question.
Nice one, Dom. Thank you. And one more for now. Agent or agentless? Yeah,
it's a very, very key question. Is how do we differ? I think we're not in direct competition with anybody that uses an agent, let's say an EDR or an endpoint solution. We complement that. There are things that an endpoint can tell you that we can't. So, for example, when something happens that is related to a specific system, and there is no communications in or out to that system, then an EDR is great for that. But what we find is that more and more, as we mentioned, I think at the start of the call, with regards to especially in an NHS organisation, more and more systems where it is difficult to get an agent deployed to, and what we're seeing more and more in for example, I witnessed within a recent red team activity is that that even the red team organizations are finding ways to profile devices on the network that have an EDR or have an agent deployed and present, and therefore sidestepping those. And they only need a very small number of systems on the network to be able to deliver their action on objectives. And of course, when you take an agent approach, you do need to deploy many agents in order to get that visibility. So what the approach we take is to complement the very granular detail that you can obtain from an EDR, where you have deployed that EDR agent or that endpoint agent to your key assets, is by complementing that by looking at the network. So we're completely agentless. We look at network packets or infrastructures that don't have packets. So O365 is a good example, logs being used there. But talking about the network, we look at those network packets, and effectively all of our models and our detection mechanisms are based upon that. We do have integrations with EDR for automated response actions, for also enriching the information that we have, so we understand more about what a system is. but we're able to do that independently through our detection logic. And what that allows you to do is get the coverage of all devices, all assets within the network, not necessarily just those that have an endpoint too. So I hope that gives some further context in a way in which how we can complement an agent-based technology as well, such as an EDR.
Yeah, it certainly does, Dom. Thank you. Yeah, so just for everyone else on the webinar, if there are any other questions, please do post them now, because there's only one more left now, which I'll read out for you. It's kind of related to what you were just saying, Don, but it's probably worth just covering off individually. So what about specifically around medical or IoT devices, the visibility around that, please?
Yeah, exactly. So we spoke a little bit about that earlier on, but yeah, what we're seeing more and more in especially NHS environments is that, you know, movement towards everything needs an IP address. And in some cases, the IT security team may be the last to know exactly, you know, what you know, why this device is on the network, and more so as well as we're working more collaboratively with our peers or other NHS trusts as such, having devices on our network that we may not have complete control over as well is also something that we're seeing more and more on. And in that situation, specifically talking about medical IoT devices, is and the example I gave, there are others, but the interesting one is with an endoscopy cleaning machines, for example. We've seen in some cases they are exfiltrating, you know, a gig worth of information to locations outside of the UK back to the manufacturer for diagnostic information in order for them to be able to provide support services to that. And so although you know, there is no attacker negative kind of behavior occurring there, we do detect that because it is effectively the exfiltration of a large amount of data out to an unknown address. And it's about giving that visibility to the organization, so at least the trust and the IT and the IT security team are aware of that. They can have conversations with the vendor and ask, you know, what's the need? Is there a real need to be exfiltrating such a massive amount of information? And in some cases, we've seen IoT devices making bi-directional communications over port 22 SSH, and again, that's really concerning, because effectively what that means is that you're effectively, from a supply chain perspective, you know, all of a sudden, you know, you're a lot more intimate now with your suppliers than you necessarily might have thought of previously. So it's about that visibility piece. I think going back to that is that we can give you that complete holistic visibility of everything that's going on within the network, irrespective of is it a device that you know about or not, and so on. And yeah, there's lots more examples I could probably give, but I won't continue to witter on, Andy. Is there any other questions?
I think that's it for now. There's no more been posted. So Lee, Dom, if you've not to add, I can wrap it up there if you like.
Yeah, by all means, yeah. Over to you, Andy.
Okay, I'll just take back control. Bear with me. Big presenter. So yeah, not much more to add really, other than to say thank you again for everyone that's joined today. Gone too far there. Obviously, I think most of you on the call know me, Andy Sherritt, so please do get in touch with me if you need a bit more information. Our general contact details are on the screen there. As I said at the start, immediately after this, you'll be served a survey, which we'd be very grateful if you would complete, please. It's always helpful for us to get some feedback on the content of these so that we can kind of make sure we're doing the right events moving forward. And as usual, Emma will be sending out a copy of the recording of this webinar within the next couple of days. So yeah, hopefully that was useful to everyone. Thank you to Lee and Dom for the presentations, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you and goodbye.